The Trivium, grammar, rhetoric, and logic. And we are going to be talking some more about logic today in this part two live stream. And when I come to talking about logic, I want to be able to highlight right off the bat, just to kind of hook you in, as it were, that there is a lot of issues that I believe are present with the way that logic is applied in the modern day. First and foremost, there definitely is a feels over reals sentiment that is shared among way more people than I'm proud to admit. And I definitely do think that feelings do matter, but I don't think that they are zero sum with logic. So I definitely want to be able to highlight that, as well as that there's a number of different logical fallacies that people still use to this very day. And this is going to be an entire series that I want to be making in order to address some of these different logical fallacies, how they're used in the modern day, and to try to discourage the use of them, or even at the very least, raise awareness of the use of them amongst people so that they have the ability to be able to recognize them and to remove power from these different logical fallacies. Furthermore to that, then there's also just an antagonism that is being that's quite the status quo, that's quite mainstream in terms of trying to use logic to fight people essentially. And while I do advocate for people to me be more logical, I also want to advocate for how my value in logic was never meant to fight, and these conversations were never meant to be antagonistic competitions. I made it short about how debates don't need to be fights. So that's essentially what I want to be addressing today, in particular, the cooperative principle, because one of the pitfalls of logic is that it really requires someone else to, it requires two people to be authentically participating in a conversation, and to be doing that in a very cooperative manner, and to be doing that in a manner where effectively you are trusting the other person in the conversation. So that certainly is going to be one factor that I want to talk about today, as well as everyone thinks that they're right, and I think that that really doesn't help out with some of the pitfalls that I am trying to address in terms of logic and conversations, because then it becomes a scenario of, it becomes more of a competition, and people can get quite defensive because, oh, like, your different ideas, therefore this representation that, or this implication that I'm incorrect, and therefore I've been attacked, and so I have to defend my position and build a fortress around my position and plant iron boots into my position. You know, that is kind of really well, that is very unfortunate as far as I'm concerned. I think that there is a disproportionate arrogance, frankly, in terms of everyone thinking that they're right. I have made a number of different shorts in regards to sharing an opinion as an opinion and not a fact, and presenting using rhetoric that is authentic to presenting the opinion as an opinion. So, for example, saying I think, or I believe, or this is my perspective, and making it more clear with your words that it is subjective. Although, unfortunately, there's a number of people that also tend to think that someone is no longer sure about what it is that they're saying or what they believe in if they say I think versus I know, which I really disagree with. I really do. And also, no one really knows. So in some ways, in some scenarios, yes, I am not sure. Like, I'm not sure who is going to, say, for example, there are some upcoming elections in Australia. We have Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton amongst a number of different political parties, or even in Canada. I'm not even sure who's going to be the next leader of the Liberal Party in Canada. And so I could say, I think that this is going to happen. I think that Pierre Poilievre from the Conservative Party is going to win the upcoming election in Canada, but I don't actually know that, for example. And for someone to say, I know, excuse me, for them to say, excuse me, for them to say that I know that it's going to have this particular outcome, and for them to be so sure about that, I think that that's insane. I think that that's absolutely insane. For sure. I absolutely do. Because they don't know. That's wild to me. That blows my mind. And yet, unfortunately, in my opinion, this is very seductive for people to hear that other people are sure in what it is that they believe in. That's very seductive to them. And if you're saying that you're not so sure, that's not as seductive. It doesn't quite inspire confidence in the person who's saying that they're not so sure. And that just is an observation that I've made over at minimum 3 decades of living on this planet. And so yeah, I think that there's a lot of that that's extremely unfortunate, and yet nonetheless it's part of the reason why I have certain issues with human nature, and I hope to, at the very least, highlight them to be able to help other people recognize them, ideally, to inspire a positive change, which would be the more optimistic outlook that I would have. But then in terms of trying to make the world a better place, but then there's also just being capable of adapting to the way that the world is as of right now. And with that being said, I think that that just has a lot to do with also just being aware of that and trying to operate in accordance to how there are a number of people who seemingly just don't have a problem or are willing to be more hyperbolic and willing to use more superlative active adjectives and willing to promise the stars and the moon to be able to attract people and to really sell them on what their perspective is. So I think that there's a lot of issues in that regard, and we'll see. I mean, as I like to say, it be what it be, the name of the podcast, powered by StreamYard, absolutely as well. And that is what we're going to be delving into with today's episode. Definitely want to start off by addressing that it has been metaphorically a minute, as it were. And so let's just change the layout of the screen over here. It be what it be podcast, as you can see. The last live stream was 13 days ago on January 28th, where I thought that I'd be doing another live stream a week away from that date. However, I had a particular busier time in my life that I've been working on trying to recover from and trying to get back on track with the content creation schedule, trying to not give up with YouTube and content creation in general. And ideally, this will all manifest and take off for me in one way or another. And I mean, so far, there's been more subscribers, 14 subscribers, 38 videos. I also stopped doing shorts on a daily basis as of January 31st. But, we still have some of the videos up here and still trying to keep up with it. As you one factor that you may notice is that we have some new aesthetics, some new clothing, and I am working on getting some more colors of this mask as well. So you can keep an eye out for that. And I mean, there has also been progress on some of the other social media platforms as well. So one of the other ones that I'm very proud of, for sure, is going to be TikTok. For as you can see with the TikTok, there is 24 followers, 253 likes, and that there's been some decent momentum, that most of the posts are getting more than 200 views. So still trying to keep up, still trying to hang in there. Definitely had a pause in terms of the content creation, but trying to make that come back, as it were. And Certainly, there's also going to be the Instagram. Now, I've been working on trying to make my Instagram into a professional account, a professional creator account. So you'll be able to notice that on the Instagram. No followers still, unfortunately, but definitely still getting some progress with some of the reels. In fact, one of them hit over 300 people. So I'm very grateful for that and trying to get back into the swing of the content creation over here. So still trying to persevere and still trying to make it through. I definitely also have my X and my Blue Sky as well. All of the links, you certainly are able to find them in the description of this live stream, as well as being able to find them on the description on YouTube. For With the It Be What It Be podcast, we are unveiling and addressing the mechanics of people, interpersonal interactions, societal influences, and life in general. Throughout my life, many people would claim that intangibles are not quantifiable and that situations in life just happen, and that it is impossible to be articulated or put into words. That never sat well with me, hence here I am sharing some of what I've discovered while continuing to learn more along the way, and also while not letting the behaviors of the Homo sapien species as a whole off the hook. Some people that inspire my content include Robert Greene, Ryan Holiday, the Daily Stoic, right? Ryan Holiday or the Daily Stoic, Mark Manson, Chris Williamson, Dr. Orion Taraban, or Psychax, and more. Jennifer Brick is also another one. And these are some of the different links: increasing in subscribers, increasing in views, trying to keep up with the grind, definitely not letting 2025 go to waste in that regard. And with that being said, we'll dive right into the content, starting off with re-highlighting the school of thought, which I talked about 2 weeks ago. The purpose of the school of thought is to help us question all schools of thought. There's definitely a lot of content over here that I want to be able to address over the coming episodes. Give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a child to think, and she'll grow up to enact legislation that saves our resources for future generations. They have a Patreon as well, and they had some videos that I played in the last live stream. They talk about logical fallacies. I'm going to be going through these ones for sure. Education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think. Albert Einstein, I love it. Your biases as well, 1000%. And I really hold this project to high regard. I think it's too bad that they let it slip through the cracks. Also, the rules of civil conversation as well. I definitely want to get back into that and more. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at their website. But I'm going to start off by getting into the rules of civil conversation, because while I did cover it last time and I made a couple of shorts on it, I last live streamed 2 weeks ago and I made a couple of shorts on it. I definitely do want to re-engage with this. So this is going to be what's going to set the stage for the rest of the live stream that I'm going to be doing today. So let's take a look, see.
You may have noticed the world is becoming an insufferable hellhole of aggressively irrational division and screamy pointlessness. Wouldn't it be nice if we could agree to have something like a civil conversation instead? Well, now we can, by agreeing to the Rules of Civil Conversation at the rather aptly named the rulesofcivilconversation.org website.
So I really like it. They literally have a website that they use, and they are trying to establish a series of rules, or a series of conventions that ideally ought to be agreed to be able to promote having a civil conversation between two different parties, two different people.
For example, if a conversation has become heated and personal, You can ask people to agree to the rules of civil conversation before commenting further. Or when you're posting something you think might result in controversy, you can preemptively ask commenters to agree to the rules of civil conversation before engaging. Or perhaps if a family member or friend's beliefs have diverged from your own.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of examples that they have here that I think are pretty interesting in terms of like some of what they're saying, like "you idiot" on Facebook, for example. So, but anyway,
It might serve to avoid an all-caps screaming match.
and I like the aesthetic of having these demon-like figures playing a guitar while their eyes are flaming and there's a flaming background showing just how spicy and heated the conversation's gotten.
These rules help reframe the conversation so that instead of attacking each other, we're working together toward a shared understanding. We don't always have to agree, but it is important that we listen to each other in good faith. And perhaps, in time, we might even be able to change some minds. Visit the
Yeah, ideally, because some of what I was also indicating with the Crash Course video from Crash Course Philosophy episode 46 was that with having conversations in good faith, ideally we are able to listen to other people and then be open to changing our position if we're presented with new evidence.
the rules of civilconversation.org to try it out. You can also download free printable posters and images, which you might want to share, like the world depends on it. This free service is provided by non-profit organization schoolofthought.org.
So, yes, there you have it. And so to move even further forward on that, yikes, just some pop ups. And nonetheless, yes, rules of civil conversation.org. And so to try and reach a shared understanding rather than win the argument, clarify with others to make sure I genuinely understand their perspective, endeavor to avoid committing logical fallacies in support of my claims, attempt to account for my own biases, and try to be intellectually humble, try to be reasonable, rational, and create coherent arguments, refrain from personal attacks, sarcasm, and mean-spiritedness, use the principle of charity to see the merits of others' point of view in the best light, remain genuinely receptive to changing my mind if presented with compelling arguments or evidence. And that principle of charity, have a link ready to go for that one, or even, well, I wonder if that actually just goes straight to, okay, yeah, so yes in a way, but nonetheless, just to make sure that I get it on the appropriate tab. There we go. So the principle of charity suggests we should assume good intentions about others and their ideas and give them the benefit of the doubt before criticizing them. Essentially, charity is how we hear what is being said and ensuring that we give the things we hear every possibility to convince us before we seek to rebut them. So, I mean, essentially, it's just about being charitable to someone else's arguments or the position that the arguments that they are purporting or the and presenting or the position that they hold. But with all of that, right, I definitely wanted to address that there is a certain level of a necessity to trust the people that we're having a conversation with. So I wanted to get to the next video, and I'm going to be trying to do my best to comment on top of it in a way that doesn't trigger the copyright. But I really, really
When it
like
comes to how we know that something described as bad is
I really, really, really like Crash Course, so I'm going to start off by, well, first and foremost, give that the whole full screen, but also going to be doing some switching between the full screen myself, just trying to get better at doing this reaction commentary. But also, this is just a reference that I really want to be able to use to display my argument and to use as a reference for what my position is. So
actually good. When it comes to how we know that something described as bad is actually good, or how we know that a reference to Netflix is really about sex, we can thank 20th century British philosopher Paul Grice. He wanted to explain exactly how we can know what is meant rather than what is said. And he described our ability to do this through a theory he called conversational implicature. Grice said to really understand what goes on when we
So yeah, I just wanted to change it because I had it set on 1.25. But yeah, I think that that's very interesting, to really understand what it is that what that's going on when we're processing meaning. So to really understand what goes on when we process meaning.
process meaning, we need to sort out the difference between what is said and what is implied. What is said is the actual linguistic content, the words that come out of the speaker's mouth. What is implied contains a whole lot more than just the words that are spoken. Implicature combines the actual words we utter with the context in which we say them. And that context can include anything from past shared experiences to social conventions to things like facial expressions, tone of voice, and gestures. Now, in order for
Yeah, so past shared experiences and facial expressions, tone of voice, sure, like there's multiple dimensions of communication beyond words, for example. And yeah, past shared experiences, I mean, if you have a particular inside joke, for example, or if there are certain cultural references, like if I'm wanted to say, for example, no matter what you do in your life, maintain the attitude of Miss Frizzle. So Miss Frizzle from the Magic School Bus, maintain the attitude of Miss Frizzle, never say never. Right? Like that is if you are from a Western country, then that's going to be a past shared experience that you may or may not have based off of some of the different content that you would have consumed while you were younger. And so as a byproduct of that, right? Then that is going to be able to enable me to use words that would have an implication that's outside of what it is that I've said, right? So obviously, however,
anyone to have a successful conversation, Grice observed that a few conditions had to be in place. First, you have to be actually trying to communicate with someone and have a successful conversation.
So in order to have a successful conversation, a few conditions needed to be in place first. I definitely do think that the rules of civil conversation are a few conditions that need to be in place first, for sure. For example, but beyond that, then I also think that there is more that you'll hear from Hank Green on Crash Course.
If that's the case, then Grice said you are
You have to actually be trying to communicate with someone and have a successful conversation.
communicate with someone and have a successful conversation. If that's the case, then Grice said you are adhering to what's known as the cooperative principle. This means that whenever there's ambiguity in what a speaker is saying, the audience should look for the most likely intended meaning of what's being said, given the context. So even if the literal words don't fit into the conversation you're having, you should try to interpret whatever your interlocutor is saying so that it makes sense. Like if you're in your sister.
So, yeah, I think that that's very interesting. The cooperative principle to be able to interpret the most likely meaning of what it is that that person is trying to say, of what that person is trying to get at or communicate, and generally that the meaning is more so the intention than the content.
Sister's room having an argument and she says, "There's the door," you can assume that she's not randomly naming house parts. She's recommending that you walk through that door and out of her space. But the burden of understanding doesn't all fall on the audience. Grice also laid out certain maxims or communicative rules of thumb which help speakers keep to the cooperative principle. These maxims fall under four main types: quantity, quality, relation, and manner.
So yeah, that there is also it's not necessarily just the audience, but then there's also the speaker who have a responsibility to ensure that their message comes across and is understood. In a lot of ways, I would say that there's more responsibility on the speaker, the interlocutor, if you will, relative to the audience, but I also don't want the audience to take what someone's saying out of context or to straw man the other person's argument as well. And I think that there ought to be an effort that's made to not straw man the other person's argument, to make sure that you are very clear on what it is that the other person's trying to get at.
There are two rules relating to quantity. First, you should be adequately informative. When your parents call you up at school and they ask how you've been, you probably just say something along the lines of, fine. Now, this might be technically accurate, but you're not giving them the quantity of information they're looking for. What they really want to know is, are you going to pass math, and are you remembering to wash your sheets? Stuff like that. Second, we shouldn't be more informative than is required. We've all met these.
So I like that, how you should be adequately informative. I think that that's very necessary, like to be able to give a sufficient amount of information to the other person, while you shouldn't be more informative than is required. So I definitely do think that there is a certain level of conciseness that is ideal, so that someone's just not going on a diatribe and taking so long to talk and get their points across, right?
People. When you're explaining to your teacher that you missed class because you were sick, you do not need to provide all of the gruesome details about the nature of your diarrhea. I mean, there really is such a thing as too much information, people. There are also two quality rules of communication. First, we shouldn't say things that we think are false. This includes people who are running for elected office. No one should just tell lies. The second quality rule cautions us to refrain from making claims.
I mean, I think that that's very interesting because the world is really filled with lies, and this is something that I made a short about this, a number of them, and I think that it's very, very sad, very disheartening, very disappointing, very deplorable, very disgusting, very unfortunate that, synonym thesaurus ABC XYZ. But the point is that I really just don't like how much the average person just lies. Whether or not they're making an excuse. I mean, I've said this in an earlier live stream, right? They're making an excuse to not hang out with somebody. I have a boyfriend or something like that, so on and so forth. Just all of these different lies that people would tell. And I wouldn't say that they are irrational or illogical, because there is a valid reason why they would do it, effectively just to make it easier for them to not have to take responsibility for a situation, or even to avoid arguing with somebody, for example. So I definitely do think that there ought to be more of there ought to be more responsibility for someone to take no for an answer. But I still think that it is very unfortunate just how, like, easily and the extent to which someone just resorts to just outright lying. I think that's very unfortunate, but nonetheless.
Claims for which we have insufficient evidence. So if you see your significant other talking to someone else in the hallway, don't go around telling everyone that they're a cheating scumbag without first checking your facts. Now, this isn't to say that people don't break these rules all the time. Some people lie more than they tell the truth. But Grice's point was, violating these rules hinders successful communication. Now, the next maxim is the rule of...
And yeah, I mean, good communication. I'll get to that for sure. There's a literally, like, Google definition, but I mean, some people, they try to be plausibly deniable, or they want to go for this read between the lines BS, using euphemisms to make it more appropriate, even though, like, I think that that is just very, like, socially defined, arbitrary, and that what's appropriate is being dictated by a particular group of people, whoever may be more in alignment with the status quo. Essentially, I don't think that there's this objective appropriate that seems to be very socially defined, and that it is different depending on the room, read the room, as they say, or the context or situation, or the people that you're dealing with, etc., so forth. and so on, the particular group that you're involved with. For example, in some countries, it is not appropriate and illegal to criticize the monarchy there. You know, UK, Thailand, etc. You know, yet it is not considered inappropriate to criticize the leaders in the United States or in Canada or in Australia, etc. So a lot of that's just socially defined, which I don't really believe in objective appropriateness, but nonetheless.
Of relation, which tells us to say relevant things. It's what keeps us from going on a tear in the middle of the Super Bowl about the home worlds of our favorite members of the Legion of Substitute Heroes. I'm looking at you, Chlorophyll Kid.
Hi, we're Charity Water. If we lost you at charity, we get it.
There is an
Give us a moment to change your mind.
YouTube channel.
And finally, there are 4 rules about the manner in which we speak.
So let's just go back here. There's 4 rules about the manner in which we speak. So let's see what we got.
First, we should avoid obscure turns of phrase. After all, this could come off as supercilious and pedantic, and might cause your interlocutor to be fractious. The point of conversation is successful communication, not showing off how big your vocabulary is. Second, ambiguity should be avoided. Keep your audience in mind when you use figures of speech and slang. The reason you don't talk to your grandmother about your bae is because she's not going to have any idea what you're talking about. Third, be brief.
So I think that's very interesting in terms of certainly avoid obscure turns of phrase. Okay, yep, fine. I definitely do agree with that. Ambiguity should be avoided, but some people want that ambiguity, and I think that can be very disappointing that is so desired in especially like just in dating situations. I think that's actually very frustrating, frankly, but nonetheless, here we are. So and people want ambiguity because maybe they don't want to necessarily share what their position is on a particular matter, and they don't want to be tactically like locked into a particular position where then they don't have room to maneuver around. I even know that, excuse me, there are some jobs that they want to have a certain level of ambiguity around who it is that they promote and why they promote them, so that then they don't have to be as transparent about how fair they are in that process. As unfortunate as I believe that is, it be what it be. It is the name of the podcast.
Don't give a 10-minute explanation when a 1-minute one will do. And finally, be orderly. Remember the time your mom recounted the recipe for her famous meatloaf from memory, and then when you tried to make it, you ended up with like whole onions and raw meat? Mom assumed you were going to know that you needed to chop the onions and bake the loaf, but she didn't say that. So the rule of orderliness reminds us to not miss steps when we're communicating information. Now, this might sound like a lot of rules, but Grice believed that we already follow.
So I think that's very great. Grice's maxims, quantity, quality, relation, and manner. I really do like them. And I believe that was all that I had intended to share.
These maxims when we engage in conversation, because generally, when we communicate, we want to be understood. And here's the cool part. Since everyone understands these unspoken rules, we can violate them from time to time, knowing that other people will get that we're breaking the rules on purpose. Why would we do that? Well, because deliberately violating a maxim is a good way to make a communicative point. This is called flouting a maxim. We flout the maxim of quality, for example, when we use.
So I think that's pretty interesting as well in terms of like flouting a maxim, and using it to make a communicative point for sure. Definitely want to make sure that I use the full screen there. Again, I'm just hopping between the full screen in and out of that so that then I just try to avoid the copyright, but nonetheless.
Sarcasm. Like, I'm sure that you've never experienced sarcasm before. And we flout the maxim of manner when we deliberately use $10 words to confuse or embarrass our interlocutor. So now that we know how to say what we mean without saying what we mean, it's time to do things. Let's go to the thought bubble for some.
Okay, so I'm just going to leave it there. But yeah, definitely sarcasm is a factor for sure. I am just going to really quickly just make a send off a quick test. Okay. Yay. I just wanted to let someone know that who just tried to give me a call that I am in the middle of trying to do this live stream nonetheless. So let's say, fine, good. I saw this on Google before. And so let's just take a look. I really like this new AI on Google. So define good communication. That is what it is that I typed into Google. So good communication is the process of exchanging ideas and information clearly and effectively so that others understand the message. It involves listening attentively, being empathetic, and choosing your words carefully. Skills of good communication: active listening, paying close attention to what the other person is saying, including both verbal and nonverbal cues. Empathy, understanding and sharing the emotions of others. Clarity, conveying your message clearly, concisely, and accurately. Respect, showing respect for the other person's perspective. So, one of the parts, definitely just like the clarity. It just is so. I just really don't like it when people try to have plausible deniability and want you to like read between the lines, essentially. And like I said, a lot of that comes up in dating. And so I think that that's very. I think that that just adds for a lot of bad situations that happen. And frankly, like a lot of situations that just don't need to happen. And for a lot of misunderstandings. And I think that if there was just clearer communication in that regard, then there'd just be a lot less of that. But it seems like people just like don't really want to do that. They're as if like the incentives are not in place for that, and that effectively that it's like so bad to rather what I'm trying to say is that like that I just think that there's a lack of empathy in that regard, especially in dating, and that people are just trying to really like use someone else as much as possible, and I think that that's really horrible, and I really don't like it. So, ideally, benefits of good communication: fostering positive relationships with others, reducing the potential for conflict, leaving all parties involved feeling satisfied. Tips for improving communication: avoiding distractions, focus on the conversation, confirm your understanding by paraphrasing or summarizing what the other person has said, choose your words carefully, and consider the needs and feelings of others. I really like that. So one of my main concerns is that I don't know how futile all of this is, I used to believe in the ability for a conversation to be productive, and conventional wisdom as I was growing up was to talk if you have a problem with someone else, particularly, if you have an issue with someone else. But I eventually realized that talking can be futile because it depends on the cooperative principle. Therefore, if someone doesn't want to cooperate in good faith, then the conversation is over before it even started. So there certainly are the conflict management styles that I've gotten involved with. But yeah, if someone's cooperating and someone else is competing, the person who's cooperating is just loses. And I think it's insane the amount of trust that one must have in another to have a conversation. And everyone thinks that they're right too, which doesn't help. So, on that note, I have another video. Yes, indeed. Yes, sir, and yes, ma'am.
The ancient Egyptians understood that they could use sound to reduce their weight and the gravitational effect. Through archaeoacoustic research,
I think that this is really cool.
Everybody thinks.
I think that this is really cool, but nonetheless, and I didn't like the other video. So you know what? Actually, I'm just gonna go to that.
When it comes to how we know that something described as bad is actually
like the video, and then I am going to go to the next video.
Everybody thinks they're right.
You have a worldview You're presented with evidence that conflicts with the worldview, so you either have to change your worldview, which is hard because you've lived your whole life with it, or you just dismiss the evidence and dismiss the authorities.
What makes sense?
And yeah, I think that that's very unfortunate. You have a worldview, you have evidence that conflicts the worldview, and then either you change your worldview or you dismiss the evidence, and people do that a lot, But I also think that there's these pressures that are applied by other people in terms of if someone admits that their worldview is, if someone changes their mind, it's as if they admitted defeat. And some people used to think that intelligence was being consistent with your worldview. Chris Williamson used to think that, but then he ended up changing his position to how the great minds change their mind all the time, and my issue, where I take issue, right, is that, and it's like some people just decide to be very unwavering, and I actually think that that's very stupid for them to be very unwavering in their position if they're not going to change their position based off of different evidence. Nonetheless,
To the universe is not the same as what makes sense to us, and we can't impose our beliefs on the universe.
If I was going to teach my students how to think critically, what are the key points, like just basic questions they could ask?
So I like that. Why critical thinking makes you smarter, and in particular, you can see the orange tint over there. In particular, about how there's what makes sense to the universe and what makes sense to us, and that can be quite different. I remember Dr. Orion Taraban talking about how people change and that people generally change through pain, and that he makes a distinction between pain and light. If someone is operating in line with reality, there's the light, and so then they are operating within the light. But then if they deviate from the light, they go into this darkness and they will feel pain because what they believe is not in line with the reality, and therefore they feel that pain, which can bring them to the light, or they ignore that, and or they don't necessarily learn the lesson, and then they continue to get pain. So I think that that's just an interesting factor as well. That there's the laws of the universe, and there's what's just also what we believe in, and what we believe in is not necessarily in alignment with the laws of the universe, but nonetheless.
I like to keep an open mind, but not so open that my brains fall out. And that's the key point. We can't we have to skeptically assess the information we receive. We can't be gullible, because when we get a lot of information, it's absolutely certain that some of that information is wrong. And
I think that that's very unfortunate. I mean, definitely I do think that people can be mistaken, but also some people just like to F you around for fun, which I think is very disgusting. They just like to F you around for fun and mess you around and just tell you these lies just for fun. And that there's this intelligence, this perception of intelligence that's associated with distinguishing a lie and telling a lie, or detecting a lie and recognizing what that lie is. There's more I want to say on intelligence later on, but I just think that that's very unfortunate that we don't necessarily just have the ability to just take people at their word.
we have to always filter what we get. And we have to ask ourselves the following question: how open does my brain have to be to accept that information? Does it have to fall out? And by that, I mean, when someone tells you something, you have to ask, is this consistent with my experience? Is it consistent with the experience of other people around me? And if it isn't,
And what I did typically get from that is that at the end of the day, you have to trust yourself. The only person that you can trust 100% is you. And despite, I mean, one thing that I think is very foul is that despite the extent and the length that some other people will go to try to convince you and sell you and get you to believe their position or even believe their lies, at the end of the day, they're always going to blame it on you, which I think is gaslighting, frankly. Because when someone's so confident and they are so relentless in getting you to agree with them, you know, I think that that's ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous that then they would not take responsibility in the extent to which they sold you on their position or their belief or their lies. I think that that's really foul.
Then probably there's a good reason to be skeptical about it. It's probably wrong. If it makes predictions that also appear to be in disagreement with things that you observe around you, you should question it. And so we should never take anything on faith. That's really the mantra of science, if you want. That faith is the enemy of science.
He's saying faith is the enemy of science, but one of the other parts that I think is very difficult is that humans, this human element, other Homo sapiens, they get so offended if you think that they're lying or you think that they're wrong, or if you try to agree to disagree, or if you try to purport that you're not going to just take them at face value and you're not going to just believe them. And I certainly do think that there are good people out there, but I think that they're very few and far apart. And in a lot of ways, someone who's good, who's considered like a good person, I mean, for me, I would consider a good person to be someone who is honorable, essentially. But at the same time, I don't think that there's an objective morality. And some people would think that someone maybe isn't good if they are not in like a monogamous marriage. I'm not even saying that they're cheating. I'm saying that like they have multiple wives or multiple husbands, multiple partners, whatever you want to call it. If someone never gets married, for example, if someone wants to be a capitalist and gets rich and doesn't want to donate their money, that there's all of these different other factors, despite how like honorable someone may be, there's all of these different other factors that someone would that would involve in the assessment of whether or not someone else is good or not. So I think it's more complicated than that, but nonetheless.
We often talk about a loss of faith in the world today. You don't lose anything by losing faith, okay? What you gain is reality. And so skepticism plays a key role in science simply because we also are hardwired to want to believe. We're hardwired to want to find reasons for things. In the savannah and Africa.
And I also think that there's a certain level of we want to believe what other people say as well. And it's so disappointing to me. And it really just, I think it's exceptionally unfortunate that just so many people are just so willing to just lie pathologically, compulsively, be these serial liars. Some people lie more than they tell the truth, as Hank Green said. And yet this is the world that we live in. It be what it be. It's the name of the podcast right over here.
Africa, the trees could be rustling and you could choose to say, well, there's no reason for that. Or maybe it's due to a lion. And those individuals who thought there might be no reason never lived long enough to survive to procreate. And so it's not too surprising. We want to find explanations for everything. And we create them if we need to satisfy ourselves, because we need to make sense of the world around us.
So I find it very interesting. He's talking about essentially like, oh, like those trees are rustling. Maybe it's because of a lion, maybe not. But then it's like, well, the ones who managed to procreate, then they were the ones that were able to pass on their values. And so now we're in this scenario where like there is a certain level of paranoia per se that to an extent I do think is outdated. I mean, to an extent, but at the same time, considering how much people are willing to lie and conceal their intentions and how much they're willing to just try to take advantage of somebody else, try to use somebody else, try to do the least to get the most, and particularly, let's say, like in game theory, where they're going to try to do everything that they can to screw someone else over for their own benefit, and they're not really trying to be empathetic or fair or honorable. All of these very disgusting tactics. Some people think there's nothing evil about it, there's just an incentive to do it. I would disagree. I do think that that is very evil. I mean, I don't think that there's an objective morality. I don't think that I am the arbiter of morality. So this is certainly just my opinion, but I think that it's extremely dishonorable and extremely foul to do that. But nonetheless, I digress. So this is the situation, that we find ourselves in. And so I do think it's necessary for an individual to try to do their best to identify where they may be hurt by other people in a situation, so that then they don't trust someone and open up the gates to their kingdom, and then someone then sabotages their kingdom from within. I just really think it sucks that that's practically a necessity that we have to do that. But
And what we have to understand is that what makes sense to the universe is not the same as what makes sense to us. And we can't impose our beliefs on the universe. And the way we get around that inherent bias is by constantly questioning both ourselves and all the information we receive from others. That's what we do in science, and it works beautifully in the real world as well.
The problem is this.
So I definitely think that there's a lot of merit to that as well. However, with the interest of time, I'm just going to actually leave the rest of this for a part 3, which I will be aiming to do maximum 1 week from today. So I'm going to leave a lot of this for a part 3. But that being said, definitely wanted to thank you for checking out this live stream. Certainly trying to be better at trying to get this to be less than an hour for each live stream and each video, and just trying to get back into the swing of trying to be consistent with all of this content creation. Hopefully I am able to just keep up with it, keep my spirits up, and I ideally am hopefully able to create some community with this as well. But that being said, as I like to mention, it be what it be, for sure. Thank you very much for checking the podcast, and keep an eye out for some of the upcoming shorts and for the next live stream. With all that being said, enjoy the rest of your day.